Welcome, welcome. Welcome to Embodied Ecologies. My name is Salome Esega. I am the director of New Inc. New Inc. is New Museum's cultural incubator for creative practitioners working across art, design, technology, and science. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. To recognize a land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory you reside on, and a way of honoring the indigenous people who have been living and working on the land before us. It is important to understand the long-standing history that has brought you to reside on this land and to seek to understand your place within that history. We would like to acknowledge the Lenni Lenape people, who are the original inhabitants of Lenapehoking and the island of Manhattan. So this evening's presentation is part of a Science Sandbox funded program series featuring New Inc.'s Creative Science track, which explores scientific topics and the urgencies of our climate crisis through art, performance, food, speculative design, mixed reality, and so much more. There are very few institutions that support this kind of artist-led research, investigation, and community action. So I want to express deep thanks to John Tracy and Yvette Mondino, who are maybe somewhere in the crowd, I can't see you, and the entire Science Sandbox team for seeing and lifting up our work. Tonight, I'm so thrilled to co-host Embodied Ecologies with Serpentine Synthetic Ecologies Lab. Thank you, Kay Watson, Yasaman Sheri, Alex Boyes, for saying yes and for joining us. It's been truly a pleasure to connect the dots between our programs and offerings, and I think we're planting a seed for much more to come. So the structure for tonight. So this evening is anchored by a keynote presentation by Yasaman Sheri, and who is also a mentor in our New Inc. program. The keynote will be followed by presentations from 6 creative science track members. We'll have 2 rounds of lightning talks, each followed by brief panels. And having worked closely with the artists on this track, mentor in residence Fiona Raby will act as a respondent for the evening. And before passing it off to Kay, I just want to give a couple thank yous. I want to thank the powerhouse that is the New Inc. team for all your hard work to make this evening happen. That's Raul, Raven, Maddie, Andrea. We're back in person. We're not on Zoom. Thank you, Derek Wright, for all your production support. And thank you to our ASL interpreters, Candice Davider and David Canas. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to Salome, Raul, and everyone at New Inc. for inviting us to be part of this amazing event. And thank you to the New Museum for hosting us, and to also all of the brilliant practitioners who you're going to see presenting tonight. So to introduce myself, I'm Kay Watson. I'm Head of Arts Technologies at Serpentine. For those of you that don't know, we are a London-based arts organisation that presents a year-round free programme of exhibitions, architecture, education, civic projects, live events, and technological innovation, both on-site at our 2 Hyde Park galleries and beyond. So the Synthetic Ecologies Lab that Yasaman Sheri is leading as principal investigator is an example of the work that takes place through our Arts Technologies programme. The aim of which is to propose a critical and interdisciplinary perspective on advanced technologies and science through artistic interventions. So we do this through commissioning on the one hand, building teams around artists and ideas, and on the other hand through something called the R&D platform. Now this is our programme for research, investigation, experimentation and strategic work, a space for testing out different types of structures that arts organisations need in order to support creative practice in emergent spaces and fields. So a key part of this is also our role in the ecosystem, of which includes organisations like New Inc., artists, creative practitioners, funders, research institutions, working together to create spaces of experimentation and public value in response to our unique capabilities and missions. So since 2020, the Synthetic Ecologies Lab has been developing the strategy to create a vital space within a contemporary art organisation to create new public narratives and resources around art and life sciences, create broader access to knowledge, and in the long term to develop unique projects in dialogue with industry and research, led by Yasaman, who'll be giving the keynote this evening. So I'm going to introduce Yasaman now. Yasaman is a designer and researcher who works at the intersection of technology and life sciences. She has a decade of experience in industry, leading the core interface design direction across a number of immersive platforms. Her practice explores sensing, perception, and invisible scales at which humans frame and reframe ecologies through culture and technology. So I will now hand over to Yasaman to give the keynote. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yasaman Sheri. Thank you so much, Kay, for the lovely introduction, and to Salome for having us. I'm really excited to be here tonight. I wanted to start this evening by talking about creative science and what that could mean for us. I'm not going to talk about creativity or science and what those specific things mean, but I'm going to start with a different point of view. I've always been inspired by the way different cultures tell stories around nature. I've seen and experienced some in my culture and adjacent cultures in forms of poetry and songs. This particular one is Pantra Chantra, or Kelila and Demne. It's stories of animals and how they interact with one another, but also perceptions that they're told through the story. It's really inspiring for me to think about this perspective. And throughout human life, cultures less dominant, older, indigenous practices actively interact in communion with nature. This particular one is singing to remember methodologies or dancing to honor many living things. At the heart of these practices is an enmeshing of culture and experimentation. This happens in kitchens, in places less explored, in fields, and in all sorts of spaces. I wish that you could hear this. You can actually find it on Instagram. I follow this through, actually, it's a natural sake house, and they kind of cultivate old practices in sake. It's by Japanese, essentially, sake house. So you can even follow them on Instagram, and you will see it in the caption. This is the caption on the post, and it says, "This is the first time this season where I hear the song. It makes me feel excited and happy, saying this year has begun. We sing songs when we make sake. I think that brewers' happy feelings will be sung, and the bacteria will ferment vigorously, making it a fun drink for those who drink it." The Terada Honke continues to work on natural sake brewing, today aiming for the sake that is said to be the head of 100 medicines that pleases the mind and the body. I especially like this part: happy, fun, and thankful. I feel like this is the spirit of creative science: experimentation, happy, fun, and honoring the different invisible living things that we interact with. Alongside fermentation of koji and sake in Japanese cultures are many more practices in the mixed fermentation, yeast, bacteria, human cultures. You could say bacterial cultures and human cultures are mixing. People talk about this, but I like to bring it up. This one is made by another Instagrammer, who I actually also follow. When I came back from Mexico, I learned about tepache, and this was sold in a place that I had to find through Instagram where it is, but essentially it's a Mexican man who's making tepache from the old traditions. It's made with, I want to say ananas, but it's pineapple leaves, fermented. Examples continue over and over and over again. This is pulque, the history of looking at different cacti and the kind of juice that comes out of it. as beverages. Ayran, made with milk products, and dur, natto, which is made with soy, kimchi, and so on. This particular one is makgeolli. Essentially, these practitioners have the ethos, the spirit of what I call creative science, because they're experimenting, and the ethos of experimentation means that they're trying something out that might work or might not work. In the process, they're learning and they're documenting, whether in their minds or through songs or through maybe written notes, and cultivating a sense of curiosity and a relationship with other living things. Whether this is for taste or for preservation or for health or community or for culture, and to preserve a communion between the human beings who are eating it. This is a practice that I love. I especially like this one because it shows these different vessels and different, I actually can't read it, but I love the drawings because it shows the different fermentation vessels. And I find this really interesting because in biotechnology and in synthetic biology, the similar kind of practices are also investigated, which is allowing yeast or bacteria to ferment inside big vats. So I think from the left all the way down to the right, modern technologies have made us kind of look into these. We also visited the Crick Institute recently. And what I love here is that they're actually talking about beer, and they honor the Somalian history of where this beer came from. And also the scientists in the lab even refer to these practices of interaction between themselves and also their own experiences. So in my experience of being in a lab with scientists, they sometimes had to come into the studio or into the lab at 2 a.m., which means that they are kind of living in interaction with the living things that are in the lab. And so kind of the temporalities, they have to shift and morph for them to adjust to that reality. But they're also looking at kind of this as a study. So they're kind of growing it in bigger vats and also looking at how these yeasts are really close to the human chromosome and studying it and learning for the kinds of medicine we might have today. I also like it because I think it's interesting, this back and forth, because there's invisibility and then there's kind of these imaging technology that we begin to kind of look into what the cell looks like and so on. Essentially, the scientists that I've met and I've talked to, I find often that their ethos is also experimentation and creativity. I want to talk about one idea here, though. Although these things are really exciting, and I don't mean to quote Michel Foucault, because I don't know, maybe we don't need to highlight Michel Foucault right now, but I love this sentence because I find it really interesting that in his book, Discipline and Punishment, he's talking about disciplines and the problem with disciplines, and how this is actually the same original history of social movements and mechanisms of control established in modern prison and penal system in the 18th century France. I find this fascinating because in my conversation with a few different folks who are both in the advisory panel of the lab, but also friends and longtime collaborators, they also talk about this notion of discipline and this kind of quasi idea of perfect boundaries. More recently, I talked to Christina Agapakis, who's a longtime collaborator and someone I admire very dearly. And I asked her, what does creative science mean to you? And she said, we make very tidy stories about what science looks like. There's a brilliant insight followed by a reasoned path to a conclusion. In that world, creative science might focus on the brilliance of the original insight and creative energy of hypothesis. But science actually looks a little bit different. And she talks about here of letting go of assumptions about what the path is supposed to be like. That in fact, stopping along the way to ask specific questions and to reiterate back at where you started is part of the process. Taking into account your own limited perspective as a human being in a particular place and time, having grown up with a particular set of social understandings and cultural ideas, some of the things I tried to talk about at the beginning of the talk, is what matters and what doesn't matter. I like this writing from Christina because it really talks about what the ethos of creativity, but also the ethos of experimentation, that we want to sometimes fit things into that thing that we defined, but actually the openness is incredibly important. I also talked to my dear friend Paige Emery, who is an ecological artist, and her work is incredibly poetic, and she thought about creative science in this way, that creative science is a type of science that values listening and is in its research cultivating an openness for more than human ecologies. Here in this book by Ignota Calendar, she looks at different plants, and I really like this idea of openness and listening, also things that we cultivate in our culture. Lastly, I spoke with Elizabeth Henaf about creative science and what this means to her. Creative science is a science that challenges the hierarchies of control of subject-observer, one that allows for reciprocity. I like here Elizabeth's comment because I think here she talks about control in a very particular way. Her practice as a scientist, she talks about science is a practice of control. It's embedded in the language, isolation, purification, and so on. She says that creative science is one that releases that and acknowledges that the boundaries are actually not limited to, they're not rigid, that they're actually porous. And I think this is a really interesting way of looking at it coming from a scientist. So, I'm really honored and proud and excited to have created the Synthetic Ecologies Lab with Serpentine Galleries as part of the R&D platform within Arts Technologies. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to look at models of creative inquiry into life sciences. The thing that I love about this lab is also the fact that we want to move between these different boundaries and make it porous. Perhaps as a creative inquiry into new ecologies and life sciences reframed. We want to support artists and creative practitioners, strengthening the foundation of arts creative inquiry. We also think that the climate emergency is incredibly important, and that artists, creative practitioners, designers, anyone who's in thinking about that creative science ethos can give back to science different points of views and different ways of thinking. Perhaps coming back to that porous experimentation boundary. We also are excited about different topics that have come from our own practice, and perhaps our advisor panel and all the people, the communities that we're involving into our lab. For instance, translation models and criticality, aesthetics of new nature, poetics of sensing and perception, ecological art and microbial aesthetics, cultural narratives to enter scientific spaces and beyond human scales, small or large. But more importantly, I love this one, reframing of science and biological technologies in cultural and popular discourse. This includes language, this includes giving form to ideas and immersing folks. So I really like tonight's topic, embodied ecologies. For the lab, we are building some exciting new stuff. One of our ethos is to not only bring different kinds of practitioners, but also have different kind of media that we engage with. I find this incredibly important because I think different kinds of information and different kinds of language and ways of looking will also help us formulate our diverse thinking. So this could mean different kinds of mythologies or graphic novels, things that you might at first seem disparate in the ways that we tell stories around science. I recently have been reading Frankenstein, so around monsters, so I think that's really interesting, but we can talk about that after. Last but not least, I want to talk about these things that often in dominant cultures we discuss as binaries, and I want to interrogate that. The lab and its practitioners, as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, look into different cultures that perhaps might not think of these in binaries. Nature and human. Are we part of nature? Synthetic and real, rational and emotional, wild and engineered. I think these boundaries are porous. Sometimes people think of these both at the same time, or none. So I think it's exciting to question these language and also begin to think not in binary terms, but plural terms. I'll finish off by mentioning that we're excited about our biggest project coming near you in spring 2022, which is almost now, but in a few months. It's the Synthetic Ecologies Compendium. One of the ethos for this project, which you'll find out soon, is to bring different knowledge systems together and to question, but also begin telling different stories and multiplicity of stories. This particular image is about the history of the hypertext and encyclopedias, and I'm really fascinated by that and how knowledge is created in these spaces and how pluralities can stay. So I'll finish off by saying, when we think about our Earth today, we need experimenting, inquiring, exploring, to try something new and not to be afraid to revisit the knowledges and histories that are erased and forgotten. That could mean that they exist in a new form, or that we highlight people that have not been highlighted. It could mean that we take a path less traveled. It could mean that we do something that's socially not as acceptable, and be fearless to do things that are not immediately profitable. I like this one. It says, I wish the earth was more like a library, people speaking in soft voices on the streets, everything shared and borrowed. I actually really love libraries compared to bookstores, but we can talk about that more also. And inspired by self-assembly, I think it doesn't have to be that we all agree on the point of view. I think it's just allowing different people to self-assemble and tell each other stories back. And that's the spirit of creative science, in my opinion, and in my conversation with the few folks I spoke to. I'm curious what you think creative science is, and I do wish for everyone to feel invited to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasaman. Let's have another round of applause for that keynote. So, does everybody have a seat? There's one more there. That has the reserve sign. You can take it. Is anybody else still looking? All right. So, my name is Raul Zbengech. I'm the new Associate Director of New Inc. As of 1 month ago. Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce the first round of presenters, Nocturnal Medicine, Leslie Ruckman and Gal Nissim, and Ani Liu. Now we can give the stage to Nocturnal Medicine.
We'd like to invite you all to close your eyes and sink into the sound. Imagine you are walking with a group of friends to a garden. Night has just fallen, and the streets are quiet. News has come out today that the honeybees are almost gone, and you are walking with heavy hearts. As you get closer to the garden, you hear the hum of voices. Entering through the gate, you see candles lit and people gathered. In their center is a pile, the bodies of bees whose lives have left them. You join the circle, lower your heads, and let your hearts mourn.
Please open your eyes and come back into the room. This is a beautiful vision, but it's not where we're at today. Instead, as populations of insects continue to diminish and new ecological crises emerge every day, most of us here do not have the spaces or practices in our lives to really acknowledge these losses and to process them and to sit with the emotions that they bring up. And yet we struggle. We are sick with the pain of environmental crisis.
So why can't we do better, right? Why is this happening? Because climate change, it is not a you problem. It is not a me problem, right? It's not happening at the individual level. Climate change is a cultural problem. It exists at the level of mainstream Western culture. It is entrenched in our government, in our economic system, and in our ways of understanding who we are in relation to the rest of creation. It is clear, right? It is clear that to stop harming others, we need a paradigm shift. In the same way that we have funerals for the death of a loved one, or we have birthdays to mark the passing of time in our lives and to celebrate it, we need shared rituals that bring us together to mark and process the radical changes of today's Earth.
Climate change comes from cultural dynamics with nature, and therefore to address it, we need profound cultural change. And that's what we're working on. We are Nocturnal Medicine. We are a nonprofit design studio founded in 2016, and our mission is to heal our connection with nature. We do this by creating the cultural resources that we so badly need for real transformative cultural change to happen. I'm Michelle Chauffet.
And I'm Larissa Belsich. So our work together grew out of our training and experiences as landscape architects, as event producers, as researchers in culture and environment, and as educators and spiritual facilitators. Our work has been celebrated in publications like the New York Times and Bloomberg City Lab as being on the cutting edge of environmental therapy. We work on multidisciplinary teams in collaboration with DJs, therapists, activists, spiritual facilitators, and we've produced work for academic institutions, nightlife venues, and cultural organizations.
Our methods are research-based, and we employ two key strategies. One, we create sacred spaces and rituals that help us face the implications of our changing planet. And two, we create transformative experiences that allow for deep learning at the level of the unconscious. Research in climate psychology and sociology shows us that these methods are key tentpoles to healing our relationship with nature.
So our work draws on new and ancient traditions and brings spirituality and emotion back into the conversation around the environment in Western culture. We've created a funeral for insects, a chapel for bees, a climate grief rave, a digital temple for wildfire-induced loss.
We use sensual, tactile, and participatory means and diverse healing modalities into approaching the painful realities of today. We create learning opportunities that aren't didactic, but embodied and experiential. And we offer multiple entry points into complex, larger-than-life themes so that people of all backgrounds and ages can find connection.
So, what are we working on now? So right now, we're developing an event series at the nightclub Nowadays that connects us with nature's rhythms and today's environmental realities. We're partnering with doctors at the Pacific Neuroscience Institute to research how transformative experience can be a healing force. And we're developing a proposal for an earth-centered temple for diverse spiritual traditions.
The possibility for change is very real, and we're already moving towards it, but we need your help. If what we're talking about resonates with you, here are some of the ways that you can support us. You can hire us to work with your community. You can donate to our projects fund, and you can help us find a workspace.
But one of the most important things that we can all do is to build and honor our own practices of connection, recognition, and reflection, right? So to that end, we have given you all a gift. I would ask right now if everyone could please reach under your seats and find the velvet box that is towards the back of your seat. So once you find it, I'm going to ask that you open it. So we've given you all a bee. This bee lived its life in a meadow in Coxsackie, New York, and you are now the steward of the body that it has left behind. So with this gift, we are inviting you to be the author, right, of your own relationship of care and respect. You have a choice now. You can choose to bury it. You may choose to place it somewhere special. You may choose to forget about it. But whatever you do, we ask that you please take this responsibility seriously and with love.
Our gratitude to you for giving us your time, to our fellow presenters and our mentor Fiona, to New Inc., the New Museum, Science Sandbox, and the Serpentine Gallery for giving us this incredible opportunity. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
It's so tremendous to be here with you in my body, with your bodies. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Ani Liu, and I'm a researcher and artist. In my journey, I've worked in architecture, wearable technology, biological design. The nerdy part of me is interested in how things work and how knowledge is made, and the feeling part of me has its pulse on the body politics of emerging technologies. Like many in this room, I wear many titles, but today I wanted to speak to you as a mother. I was lucky enough to give birth twice, and during the pandemic, motherhood felt a lot more like this. Children don't fit tidily on timelines, and my rhythms of life adapted to rhythms of care. When I first got pregnant, I wanted a science-based pregnancy. I looked for data-driven answers to simple questions like, can I have coffee? What about wine? What about, I'm a research-based artist, so I thought the answers to these questions could be found through the data. But actually, there were a few hurdles. Despite the fact that 8.6 out of every 10 persons with uteruses will give birth at least once, research around women's reproductive bodies is steeped in histories of sexism and racism, resulting in biased and incomplete knowledge. There's not enough time to deep dive here, but epistemologically, once we started medicalizing birth, everything from the process, language, and naming of the reproductive system became problematically filtered through a male gaze. And this is not to say that I don't love data and science and knowledge. We actually need more research in this domain. For instance, in PubMed, there are twice as many papers about erectile dysfunction than there are about breast milk. And Katie Hines, this amazing researcher, points out that we know more about coffee, wine, and tomatoes. And so, in the sea of unknown, in order to make sense of my own pregnancy, I did what felt natural to me. I made art about it. As hormonal waves overtook my body, as I swelled and started to ache, I came across feminist writer Shulamith Firestone, who noted, "As long as women carry the burden of reproductive labor, there cannot be equality between the sexes." And so I started to fantasize, like many did before me, about artificial wombs. While most conventional depictions are mechanical, I started to wonder, what if the future of artificial wombs aren't welded, but grown? I learned about interspecific pregnancy, where one species can carry the pregnancy for another species. We actually did this with cats to try to bolster populations of endangered pandas. I started to research pigs as a potential surrogate. After all, we've already engineered pigs to produce human organs. But as I dove into the research, I started to feel uneasy. Was this not just a form of colonization? Surrogacy is not simple. It can allow same-sex couples to have a child, empower women to help those in need, and exploit the health of those in poverty all at once. Perhaps we don't need a techno-utopian answer to gender equality. We need policy changes that can make room economically and culturally for reproductive health. Paid family leave is especially important in the postpartum period. For medical reasons, I recorded how often my daughter was fed and changed. From top to bottom, the 24 hours a day, from left to right, days of the month, and you can see we didn't do a lot of sleeping. The pandemic revealed that mothering is essential work, and without childcare, families were pushed to crisis. As an artist, I've been recording and trying to make sense of my own experiences through the material culture of my motherhood, with breast milk and diapers and breast pumps. And toys. After all, we're all primed from childhood for the system society wants us to abide by, and I've been studying toys as a behavioral simulator. And research shows it's not just child's play. It can have real impact on identity formation. I've been training an AI model on real-life toys to learn more about how we gender children both overtly and subconsciously. We're biocultural organisms that are shaped not just by biology, but by environmental and material contexts. How might we unlearn gendered values starting in childhood? While I've often referred to my pregnancy and motherhood on feminine terms, I want to acknowledge that there are many with uteruses who give birth as men or non-binary. How might design help them break barriers too? I've been speaking with transgendered persons to learn what types of garments are gender-affirming to them. And I've been designing a series of pregnancy menswear to normalize and remake stigmatized assumptions between gender, sex, and fertility. I also wanted to note that we need to fully support our friends who don't choose parenthood as well, starting with protecting abortion rights. For me, who did become a parent, there's a quote that summarizes how I feel. I love my children more than evolution requires. In my reproductive journey, I learned there's no one way to be pregnant or to parent. We're diverse, and there's limits to the data we currently have. As Donna Haraway notes, science is a situated knowledge, and as such, always partial, dynamic, and open to revision. And I find that this is the perfect space for creative science. Gender equality is socially constructed and needs to change through policymaking. Artists working with science can impact cultural perceptions. You can learn more about each of the projects I showed today through the postcards in your goodie bag, along with the sticker to spark conversation. When I first started making art, as a student, I rarely saw art about motherhood in galleries. I avoided pregnancy because I was afraid it would kill my art career. When I did become a mother, there were so many things about my own body that surprised me, things that I'd wish we talked more openly about. I make this work because it's my lived truth, and it's the story of my body, but it's also the story of many other bodies. So much change starts at the cultural level, so let's spark some conversations. Ask me for a studio visit. Let me introduce you to my favorite artists and designers working in this space. And let's foster an ecology of care. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here. My name is Leslie. Hi, I'm Gao, and together we create biophilic experiences to bring people closer to nature. Even though we both grew up in cities, we've each been drawn to nature and animals, always seeking out interactions with the non-human world. And we believe that everyone in this crowd as well has an innate need to connect with nature. But sometimes we just need help to find it, like a therapist that helps guides you through the understanding of your emotions. We create opportunities to bring people closer to nature and deeper the connections that they might otherwise.
But one challenge is that when most people think of nature, they think of a place like this, a wilderness that's far away and out of reach. But you can also find it here, in urban environments, and even here, in the most human-centered environment, our homes. So today, we want to share with you 3 projects that guide people towards meaningful connections to the wildlife who share our homes. When we think of these creatures, we often see them as invaders. And in our first collaboration together, Surveillance, we aim to show ants in a different light. So Surveillance is a biological art installation that uses computer vision algorithms to explore the unseen world of ants. And we were moved to see our audience's reactions shift from a view of ants as insignificant or repulsive to a place of curiosity, where they had questions about their collective behaviors, moments of admiration, and wonder and reflections about the biological algorithms that also drive human behavior.
For our next project, Swan Song, we look towards the sky, towards the wild birds that visit our cities and migrate through it. We created an urban intervention art installation that focuses on the topic of cities as shared habitats. And to bring attention to the unintended consequences when we design our spaces without considering other species. Birds collisions kill around 1 billion birds every year in North America alone. That's 32 birds every second. Last summer, we showcased a proof of concept at Pioneer Works of Swan Song, and we used real sounds of birds colliding with windows that were played through exciter speakers to reflect and vibrate the glass to reflect their impact. Birds can perceive the concept of glass, and we as humans can see into the UV spectrum. We created a UV mural to help participants explore the unseen and make the unseen visible for both species. To extend this installation even further into people's homes, we created AR and audio experience kits that people could take home and share their own windows, and even create a UV mural for the birds who share their neighborhood. And this summer, we're going to continue to develop this project at a residency at Governor's Island.
So lastly, this brings us to Home Bodies. This is the latest project that we're working on. It's a series of take-home art objects, each with a unique guided experience that helps you become hyper-social with the wildlife who share your home. The series has 3 parts that are taking inspiration from the Eames film Powers of 10, moving from the micro to the municipal. And so when we zoom in, we're looking at the microfauna that inhabit your body and relating to our own bodies as ecosystems of wild creatures. Zooming out, we explore the personal space of the home, making connections with houseplants that are often exotic species from faraway landscapes, breathing life into our indoors. And zooming further out, we travel outside our homes to build on our prior work with birds and make deeper connections to these creatures that are familiar yet wild. To realize this concept, we decided to start in a place that we've all been spending a lot more time lately, our homes.
Many of us have houseplants, but we rarely think of them as wild creatures. Botanopathia invites you to reimagine your home as a tropical climate capsule. It is a guided experience of interspecies communion, a time to connect with your plants, yourself, and your home. But how do you connect and become intimate with a plant? You can share a cup of tea with them. a social act of tending and caring that benefits both humans and plants. To activate this experience, participants receive a kit of plant-inspired items. An immersive audio experience tells the story of humans and plants, and a series of empathy exercises guides you through your senses. A T for taste, a scent to a smell, and a C to touch. And today we're very, very excited to be sharing the proof of concept of homebodies with everyone in this audience to take home and try.
But this is only the beginning. We imagine a future where homebodies can take many different forms, an art object that builds throughout the series and is left behind in your personal space, a reminder that these intimate connections are possible anywhere. And we believe these experiences become tools for people to reshape their view of home and the creatures who share it. So we see a future where homebodies are shared as gifts, person to person, seeding a community where new thinking about these shared habitats becomes possible. So in essence, we want to help more people connect with nature in meaningful ways. So if you feel the same, we'd love to be in touch. We're always open to collaborations, workshops, talks, exhibitions, and support. So please visit the QR code to learn more about our upcoming events and stay in touch with the Homebodies series as it progresses. Lastly, we'd like to leave you with one thought. Don't be a visitor, be present, be a part of this place that we call home. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm Fiona Raby. I'm a designer, an educator, and partner in Dunn & Raby, a design practice originally based in London. In New York, I co-direct the Design Realities Lab at the New School with Anthony Dunn, which brings together project-based teaching and practice-led research through thought experiments and designs that imagine alternative ways of being in the world. As the mentor in residence for the creative science track, I definitely have the best job of all. I'm very lucky. I get to immerse myself in this wonderful creative atmosphere on a regular basis. The conversations in the group over the last year have been deeply inspiring. And I'm struck with a different kind of energy, a shift in mindset. I feel this group are asking us to connect in a very different way. They are asking us to exercise the full breadth of human capabilities, the imagination, all the senses, the intellect, to dig deep, to feel as well as think, with humility, with sensuality, to reach just beneath the threshold of our rational minds. Whenever I describe the group, I always say it's a little geeky. But as you see tonight, there's so much sensuality and richness. Lying beneath all the projects is a great deal of research and technical knowledge. It doesn't look like science. But in this place, just beneath the threshold of rational minds, is a particular sweet spot where art and science meet in the most exciting of ways. The work, of course, raises many questions. But rather than asking questions using our rational solutionist brains, I want to continue the magic and enjoy the intricacies of these tightly woven thoughts and expressions. I'm going to ask each presenter to unpack a little bit more of their worlds. So, Larissa, I've got one question only for each, but please, after the end of the presentations, do come up to the presenters and ask more questions. So, Larissa and Michelle, you're creating funerals for insects, a chapel for bees, a climate rave, grief rave, a digital temple for wildfire loss. Can you tell us more about how you shape a conversation with the environment, why you've had to invent these rituals, and the urgency you feel?
Yeah, well, we've had to invent them because right now, right, in the kind of like dominant Western culture, they don't exist. They've been lost. So I don't want to say that they've never existed, but they're not practiced right now. And in terms of, I think, trying to understand like why it's so important to kind of bring these things back, kind of climate research, in kind of like psychology and sociology has really kind of elucidated that like a big part of the reason why there is so much inaction and like lack of change is because the reality of what is going on with our planet and the life around us is so intensely disturbing and like kind of existentially threatening that we just kind of block it out. And like as a society, like we have entire like conversational protocols to kind of like help us avoid it and just like keep it away. And so actually like creating intentional spaces and creating rituals, that are emotional and that kind of like get to that fear and kind of get past that fear into the heart is necessary in order to like help people kind of, bring these topics closer to them. Yeah, that's part of it.
Okay, thank you. Michelle, did you want to add anything? No? No, that's fine. Ani, you unapologetically poke around in what might be considered uncomfortable and uneasy terrain. Previously menstrual blood, now uteruses, breast milk, and scientific motherhood. So as an artist, as a cultural researcher, what would you like to see get talked about more that doesn't get talked about enough?
So many things. I guess drawing from the personal, I feel so embarrassed to say this, but there are so many things about the pelvic floor that I didn't know about after I gave birth. I didn't know about, and maybe it's a kind of privileged thing to say, but I didn't know about incontinence or hemorrhoids. And I feel like there's so many things about bodies as they age, as they transform, that I wish that we could talk about. Other things too, like miscarriage in the workplace, for instance. So many things that happen to so many bodies silently, and how can we create a space both emotionally, professionally, personally to kind of talk about them and process them and normalize them. So anyway, talk to me afterwards. I have so many things that I would love to talk about. Yeah.
Thank you, Ani. So Leslie and Gal, wildlife is not out there. You tell us that it can be found in our cities, our homes, and within our bodies. Your projects help us become aware of the complex ecologies that entangle us with other species. So what other things within this ecological space are not being addressed by our rational minds?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Yasaman's keynote went into such great detail about the rational mind and this need for categorization and definition and control. And it reminded me of some research that we've been doing as part of our Botanopathia project, where we were interested in this notion of paradise, this kind of idea that's very human, and it's an imagined place that's filled with nature and abundance and beauty, and we can kind of lose our humanness in that space. But as we dug deeper into, where does this idea come from? We actually learned the word is 3,000 years old, and originally it meant a walled-off, enclosed garden space. So we were really struck by this notion that, from the beginning, humanity needed to separate in order to feel safe and to feel control. And this idea that paradise is actually us separated from nature was very striking. And I think through the work that we do together, we're always trying to maybe subjugate that rational mind and try to build more emotional relationships. Going through these projects, learning so much about these species that are so strange to us, and always trying to find moments of connection and to share those connections with others through these experiences. That's really the essence of what we're trying to do.
And definitely language has a lot to do with that. Even thinking about how we define species in either introduced versus invasives. they're not very different, right? Those houseplants came from wild places, and rats in New York also came from wild places, and we just don't enjoy them as much. So it's more about our perspective and how some people, I enjoy every rat, but yeah. So kind of like thinking about that and how we can challenge these preconceptions, thinking about boundaries, thinking about windows. They allow us to be both indoors and outdoors at the same time, but the birds don't see those borders.
I'd like to just add one more thing, if I may.
Yes, do, please.
That I think applies to all of our work, which is going back to this idea of sensuality and using all of your senses to bring people in past the realm of the intellectual and into the heart and into the soul, and to really create connection that way. I think with a lot of us, we're working with themes that can be really uncomfortable or really painful for people to encounter. And so when you invite people, almost seduce them into these themes by inviting them to use their senses and taste and touch and smell and kind of get into their bodies, that opens up an incredible opportunity that we really, really need, because we've known about climate change for the whole time I've been alive. I'm 33, and that hasn't been enough. So it teaches us that we need to come up with new ways of getting people into these themes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you all. The presentations
Thank you,
were
Fiona.
tremendous.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Fiona, for those poignant questions. I'm happy to introduce the last round of presentations by our 3 remaining Creative Science Track members. Please welcome to the stage Jiabao Li, Trash Club, and the collaborative project Honey Fungus by Jonah King and Sue Huang. But please welcome to the stage Jiabao Li.
Hi, I'm Jiabao Li, an interdisciplinary artist exploring interspecies world sharing, where for a brief moment, a human and another species acknowledge and honor each other's unique worlds and share the world through the act of art creation. Today, I have 3 meditations on how nature experiences human phenomena. Last year, I worked with marine biology lab in Hawaii. While the scientists were studying the squid, I noticed that the squid in the lab just sit in these boring white tanks all day long. So I wonder if I could make their environment more interesting by building a playground for them. I collect the white sand and black sand from Hawaii Islands and make them into the shape of certain countries. And while the squid was living there, he carries the sand from one side to the other and spreads it around. He swims back and forth between the countries, across the borders without a visa. He buries himself under the sand and uses these cute little tentacles to push the sand on his face as a camouflage. And watching the squid reminds me of myself in many ways as an immigrant, moving between China and the US, carrying the baggage of 2 cultures, trying to assimilate, to blend in, but found myself in this situation like the squid, where he has white sand on his body, but black sand on top, sitting in the middle of the black sand surrounded by white, but feeling perfectly camouflaged. Can you find where he is? Well, he's right there. Eyes bulging out of the sand. We build borders between our countries that can block natural animal migrations. Animals that would not care about the delineation between countries, are forced to recognize the difference and take a side. After 3 weeks, the squid completely reinterprets our human-made maps and borders from the squid's perspective. The map that humans have repetitively fought wars for in the eyes of the squid is drawn on their own terms. The second story is with the octopus. On the evolution tree, humans and octopuses have separated 500 million years ago. And they evolved distributed intelligence into a completely different extreme than humans. So I wonder, what if the world is not centered around humans, but octopus? In this work, I imagine a world where global warming causes sea levels to rise and all continents are submerged underwater. As a highly intelligent species in the ocean, the octopus have unlocked the optic gland gene that releases self-destructing hormone after giving birth. Now they can pass on the wisdom of their ancestors from generation to generation. The Anthropocene ends, and the Earth enters the Thulucene. Oops. Oh, okay. Now I need to play again. Okay. When humans are on the edge of extinction due to environmental breakdown, how can we design an elegant extinction? What can we create so that the upcoming species, in this case, the octopus, will remember us with a little bit of tenderness and empathy? And in the first attempt, we try to connect with octopuses through learning their movements, through interspecies metamorphosis, shifting from human supremacy worldview to a world where we have to adapt and learn the becoming of other species, shifting from the central governed brain into distributed intelligence, and shifting our visual-dominated senses to tactile perception. Collaborating with illustrator Eamon, we wonder what this world could be like through the octopus perception. Maybe there are bioengineered humans with enlarged organs, specialized in their functions to adapt and survive underwater. Maybe there are territorial birds that take advantage of their aerial ability when the land is underwater. Maybe there are octopus archaeologists scan through the remnants of the Anthropocene, or 3 octopuses express their opinions. It's hard because the tentacles from the same octopus may disagree with each other. The third meditation is a virtual reality film that relates humans' lifetime to nature's time. Usually we think of nature timescale as millions of years, and humans is under 100. Yet, with the current speed of climate change, many glaciers are vanishing within our lifetime. Glacial time, once was slow, is now fast.
I could hear a distant song calling me to cross bright threads of silt-thick water as they ribboned valleys new. At her feet I understood the ravishing mystery as brilliant as hard stars, flickering into a river, shifting into veins of cold, enduring love. I am not alone. I am the keeper of frozen memory. I am not alone. I must work against thaw. I'm not alone. We are not alone.
Old, weak, sick, a glacier I might pronounce like grief. I shut myself into my sorrow.
While we were recording the sound in Alaska, I wasn't able to find this chirping sound in English to describe this chirping sound that you are hearing now. And then I learned that in the local indigenous cultures language, Tagish, both is the name of their tribe and means the sound of the breakup of ice. The glaciers are modeled from the satellite data of Matanuska glaciers to document the disappearing nature. They circulate, they transform, they are living. In your goodie bag, I have prepared a mini glacier growing kit for your freezer. These 3 meditations are my continuous explorations on interspecies world sharing. Doing this research is immensely enlightening because it gives me the time and opportunity to actively think and breathe with another species. And having moments like this. And I wish you could also experience it. To do that, I need exhibition opportunities to share these works in their fullest form. Squid Map could be video installation in the museum. Cthulhu Sync could be screened as part of a public program. Once a Glacier could be an interactive VR installation. I also seek funding and partners to further the explorations. Come to me for more fun stories with Cephalopod. Thank you.
Hi everyone, we're Trash Club. I'm Morgan, an artist and technologist.
And I'm Rashida. I'm a data and visual journalist.
And we're an art collective focused on creating research-based work which investigates landscapes of waste. And we've both lived many lives before coming together as Trash Club, and our work has been published in places like the Architectural League of New York, The Guardian, and exhibited in Times Square and Queen's University, Canada.
For the past 2 years, we've been thinking about many forms of trash. When we first began, we were interested in everything from compost to e-waste. But we soon realized the questions that really drove our practice were about the histories of violence and the imaginaries of care. What gets sent out of sight? Where does it get buried in the ground? We wanted to deeply witness the places where waste ends up, and how these landscapes existed through time, our senses, and most importantly, our sense of possibility.
The closer we've looked at these questions, the more we saw that our waste often ends up in places that are beloved in their own right. Landscapes are the homes of people and plants, birds and insects, microbes and minerals. And nothing makes these tangles of relations more evident than legacy waste. We tend to see these legacy wastes in places that have seen decades of extraction, manufacturing, or waste disposal. And the responsibility over legacy waste tends to change hands frequently, with companies sometimes even going bankrupt before they can be held accountable.
In our research into legacy wastes, we were introduced to the Meadowlands, a gorgeous slice of northeastern New Jersey with a complicated history. Like much of the surrounding area, it had seen centuries of transformation. And though it had been the site of Atlantic white cedar forests and freshwater marshes that thrived alongside their brackish counterparts, the area has since been carved and cemented into dikes, ditches, and highways en route to New York City. When these transformations met resistance from the mosquitoes in the swamps, the state commission sprang into place to manage and eradicate what stood in their way. Today, the lower Hackensack River, the watershed that defines the ecology of the Meadowlands, is under review for designation as a nationally recognized contaminated site due to the presence of mercury and other waste in the riverbed.
Of course, the Meadowlands are not just an entanglement of human desires and mistakes, but it has become unrecognizable from the pastoral landscape art that characterized the area in the 19th century. So over the past few months, we've spent time interviewing local members of the community, including organizers and scientists, to better understand the challenges facing these marshes today. We were saddened to learn that even though the marshes had been so carefully restored in the last few decades, they were again at risk from rising sea levels. In response to all we learned, we gathered a small audience directly outside the trailhead of Mill Creek Marsh to witness the Meadowlands.
We looked at a love letter formed as a mixed media collage, featuring a prominent species of the area, the common reed, also known as Phragmites australis. Phragmites is considered invasive to the area, but ironically is better at sequestering the heavy metals of the marsh's sediment than its native counterpart, the cordgrass plant. Our collage featured tangles of embroidery thread, metallic beads, cuts of mirror, and shredded documents from a state mosquito commission.
The audience also immersed themselves in a virtual reality landscape created using LiDAR data and manipulated hydrophone recordings of the surrounding waters, a different apparition of the marsh. The virtual landscape again featured our species of interest, Phragmites australis, combining elements of the historical marsh with the tide of rising waters of the future. We also commissioned 2 poets who are especially adept at writing about home, loss, climate, and possibility to ground our senses through their readings. And we want to continue doing this kind of work, to invite people to deeply witness the ecologies such as this. We want them to slow down, to listen, and to notice who is gathered in these post-natural spaces.
For our next steps, we want to keep collaborating with poets, organizers, and scientists to extend our methods to other places in New Jersey, New York, and beyond. We are creating more in-situ installations, virtual reality apparitions, and other experiments in witnessing. We want to reach the same audiences that might visit places like the Shed, Pioneer Works, or even the American Museum of Natural History, and invite them to witness these landscapes with us. So far, we've been self-funding our work, but we're looking for institutional support to create the grandest visions of our projects, exhibit our work, and reach wider audiences. For now, we are Trash Club. Thank you for witnessing the Meadowlands with us.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jonah.
I'm Sue.
And we're both artists who met at New Ink last year after having extensive practices in new media and emerging technologies before that. We have each exhibited at a number of institutions internationally and been supported by various organizations too.
When we first met, we both discovered that we were working on projects about clouds. And we had an interest in landscapes and ecological intimacies. So we decided to make a new work together, and we wrote a proposal, and we received a grant from the Arts Council of Ireland. And we returned to New Ink this year as collaborators to work on this project, which we will be introducing to you today.
But first, I want you just to take a moment to notice the taste in your mouth. Consider the biochemical composition of your saliva. Think of all those living things in there, those tiny microscopic entities that actually compose your whole body, that cover the surface of your internal organs and your skin. Think about how porous and entwined you are with the world around you. You are, in fact, connected with all the living and non-living beings on the planet. This intimate mesh is a queer ecology. Our bodies extend across the earth and through each other in what scholar Daisy Hilliard calls a second body. But our world is still dominated by binaries and hierarchies. We delineate and dominate land. We conquer landscape and beings with catastrophic results.
We believe that if people understood themselves as part of a larger ecological mesh, then we could begin to access new modes of care. But how do we create the sense of interconnectedness? We are creating a sci-fi VR narrative, inviting the audience to expand their bodily experience of the greater ecosystem. Following the research, we know that VR offers new opportunities for embodied experiences to generate empathy and sensorial knowledge. And we agree with Donna Haraway that storytelling is an essential tool for imagining new futures and making kin with other beings. And we think about ecological intimacy through a lens of the erotic, Audre Lorde says of the erotic that it is a source of power that creates change in the world. In this work, intimacy beckons us back to life.
We're using mycelium as a metaphor for this kind of interdependence. But what is mycelium? We've all heard of mushrooms, but mycelium is lesser known. Mushrooms are the fruiting body of mycelium. Mycelium's that stringy white stuff that runs through the soil in your garden and your plant pot. It lives in symbiosis with all plant life. It breaks down organic material, and in fact it's everywhere, permeating all the land masses on Earth. In Oregon, the largest single mycelium, a honey fungus, was found to be the single greatest living organism on the planet. So our narrative will envision a fantastical sentient mycelium that encircles the core of the Earth, connecting us all and retaining a ledger of our intimate memories.
This fall, we've been busy with creative research. We've been investigating AI as a tool for imaginative processes. In this image, we fused together human and fungal forms, generating new hybrid bodies. We materialize in this fantasy space the concept of one body. We've been generating mycelium in 3D spaces, and we've been examining point of view possibilities in VR narratives, examining between human and fungi perspectives. So we're pleased to introduce to you today honey fungus. Honey fungus is a VR journey led by an omnipresent mycelium that encircles the core of the Earth. In this story, a young mycologist investigates a mysterious fungus. She discovers that the mycelium binds her and all of us to an extended ecological body. We're glad to share an initial visualization with you. In this sketch, we descend into the Earth. We enter into a fantasy underworld. Hybrid forms move through the mycelium. And spores unlock our most intimate memories.
We're currently in production with this project, preparing it for museum installation and distribution on VR platforms. We're very glad to have Winslow Porter on board as an executive producer, and we're incredibly grateful to New Inc., who've been amazingly supportive through this process. We're also excited to announce that we're taking specimens from the honey fungus universe, and we'll be releasing them as NFTs on Foundation with GBA in the coming months. Purchasing one of these NFTs will directly fund the project and also unlock access to special project initiatives. The first iteration of the installation is going to be shown at Visual Carlow Museum in Ireland in June.
If you'd like to get early notification about the NFT release, you can go to our website at honeyfungus.xyz, join our mailing list. You can contact us by email. You can follow us on Instagram to learn more about our process. As we end, we leave you with a thought from Robin Wall Kimmerer. Paying attention is a form of reciprocity with the living world, receiving the gifts with open eyes and open heart.
So we're so appreciative of you being here tonight with your open eyes and your open hearts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I must have got my mask on. So, we'll start with Sue and Yona. So, starting from the world within our mouths, our saliva, you connect us experientially to an intricate and complex set of entanglements and ecological intimacies. Through a series of surreal VR transformations, we dive down into the earth, into the soil, becoming fungus. So you have a series, I've been chatting with you, and you have this amazing, surreal set of characters in your story. Can you tell us about the imaginative work they do within your ecological narratives and the importance of the erotic?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Fiona. So in thinking about the kind of surreal, like fantasy nature of the characters we've developed, we were really thinking about, I think a good example to think about is Donna Haraway's Camille stories, in which she speaks about these children who have symbionts, who are monarch butterflies. And so the genetics of these monarch butterflies are merged together with the children, and the children then are able to experience the sensorial world of the butterflies. And so these human fungal bodies, which we've been working with, represent a similar kind of exploration in which we're able to then think about what the world would look like through the eyes or the perspective of a fungus. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we chose the mycelium because, to answer the part of your question about erotic, we erotic fungus, we chose mycelium because, mycelium is kind of this inside-out process. It digests its food, it makes love externally to the hyphae threads in the soil. And so, in fact, a hyphae thread will burrow through rocks in order to find a mate. But the kind of union that they experience is almost unfathomable because there's so many different variations for like gender inside of mycelium. There's one particular mycelium called the schizophrym commune. This is the geeky stuff you were mentioning earlier. That has 23,000 gender identities. So we were kind of thinking about how far out can we push our conception of intimacy. And we were also looking at, for example, James Lovelock, the guy who made the Gaia theory. He was asked by NASA to send something into space, I think it was to Mars, to see if there was life on Mars. And so first of all, he had to figure out, how can I define life in the broadest term possible? And he decided it was anything that acted against entropy. So they could measure gaseous, exchange in the atmosphere and figure out if the molecules were working against falling apart, which they would naturally do. And so that was his conception of a very broad definition of life. So we started talking about, what if methane and oxygen was a kind of erotic exchange? That could you expand your conception of eroticism to incorporate gaseous exchange on a planet as being some kind of slow planetary orgasm? So yeah, that's what we were thinking about.
Thank you. Wonderful. Jiabao, these meditations are so poignant, preparing for an elegant extinction, holding on to that last little bit of humanity, a gesture of making art for octopuses, so we can, octopi, isn't it? So we can be remembered by them, hopefully with tenderness. So putting us in this humble position of recognizing that there are multiple intelligences in the world and that maybe the human one is not the most intelligent or sophisticated. I know you spend a great deal of time with your subjects. Can you tell us more about the desire you have to co-create with non-human entities and any more thoughts you may have on interspecies world sharing?
Thanks, Fiona. Thanks for the question. I think humans are so self-centered. Co-create with another species can help us probe into different intelligence, shift our perspectives, and interrogate ourselves. And also this involvement have different layers. For example, we visit a city, or for example, visit a glacier. There's different layers. You see some amazing things on the screen, or you take a tour, and then the third layer is you co-create with the glacier. You do some on-site interference, and you hug it, you kiss it, you live together with it. You have to know all the research, science part, and the culture, the indigenous part, all the things that come before you. And then you look at it in a very different form. And for example, my interaction with the squid, because the squid are most interactive at night and during sunset and sunrise, and I kind of become sync with the squid and become most active during that time. And yeah, it totally provides a very different perspective. And I think, of course, also it needs to be done ethically. they have to have agency. They can't be inanimate, become like a paint or clay, but they have the agency and autonomy. And also the work that address just human issue, but not addressing the animals, I think it's unethical. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. So, Rashida and Morgan. So this is a completely new project for you. You've only been investigating it for a short while, but I'm really taken with the idea of deep witnessing. It asks us to be present, something I think that many of the projects in the group also ask us to do. I mean, you compress and transcend time and space in a freezing, concrete industrial parking lot through VR landscapes, poets, and a love letter to an invasive reed species. Can you tell us more about your ideas around deep witnessing, time collapsing into place with these legacy waste landscapes?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I guess as kind of like the broad way we think about deep witnessing right now is that it's the ability to be present with more than like human senses in some ways. And then, so kind of the ability to look at the past of the location or the landscape we're investigating and then also imagine potential features of it. But beyond that, it's also part methodology of acknowledging agency in the non-human actors in that space. And somebody that's helped us think through that heavily is artist researcher Susan Shupley, if I'm pronouncing her last name right, and her idea of material witnesses. And so, for an example, in the Meadowlands, the Phragmites australis, it acts as the material witness in its ability to categorize and intake external events and human violence through its absorption of legacy wastes in like the Hackensack River's sediments, and then hold those wastes in its roots for decades.
Yeah, I think we're really excited to keep expanding on this idea. It's been really interesting to think of those non-human entities as witnessing and sort of kind of join them in that practice. Something that has been growing in how we're developing the things we make is I think we're trying to make some of those hidden elements, those hidden histories or possible futures more legible. And those are sort of like sometimes literal threads we're playing with. Yeah.
So thank you very much. So I just want to finally mention Lydia White, who's one of our team members, who cannot be with us tonight, who sends us all her very best wishes because her baby is due imminently.
She had it.
Oh, she had her baby! So all of us at Creative Science send her our embodied ecological love. So I want to say a few thank yous. I want to, first of all, thank the creative science practitioners for pushing at the edges, for getting us to reach deeper into our humanity and to make that world a little bit bigger. And on an institutional level, I particularly want to thank New Inc. And the New Museum and Science Sandbox for creating and enabling this very precious and magical space, a platform for exchange where ideas can emerge, grow and strengthen. There needs to be more platforms like this in the world. So thank you all very much. Thank you for all of our presentations. Thank you.
I hope I can do justice to the end of this programme. I just want to, echoing Fiona's words, I just want to say thank you and congratulations to everyone who has presented tonight. They've done such an incredible job. They've really taken us on a journey, really, through so many hybrid spaces, thinking about so many different notions of care, the multiplicity of scales and species, and really moving through and acknowledging these different histories and futures, all through the sort of the awareness of the material and our bodies, something I'm even more aware of after one of the presentations. thank you also to New Ink for orchestrating this brilliant event. They are really a brilliant team, and it's such a privilege to be able to be here in person, and we hope it's going to be the first of many collaborations between our institutions. And then also just to echo what Fiona has said, which is how vital art and culture is in terms of our the role it can play in the way that we develop and communicate ideas around technology and science, and the kinds of, and that's something we've been able to see tonight through the sort of the breadth of ideas, the different kinds of narratives that can emerge through creative science. And so, you know, it is so important that institutions such as New Ink and the Serpentine continue to support these kinds of practices and create spaces for experimentation.
I don't want to add too much more to that. You did it justice. Yeah. Truly beautiful evening. I want to thank Kay and Yasaman for joining us, and Fiona for just being our guide through the year. To the Creative Science track members, you did it. Thank you for bringing us back to in person. You showed us visions for what could be, what should be. The futures you presented tonight are richly intimate, tender, full of care. I am ready to live in these worlds. So we have one more creative science program as part of this cohort year, and that will take place in June. So you will hear from me very soon with those details. And New Ink's annual demo day returns as an in-person event this May. So I hope to see you both in the spring and in the summer. And now we're going to invite you to Arsenal Contemporary across the street for a short reception. We will celebrate the artists, and we'll also get an early preview of the gallery's upcoming Genevieve Cadeau exhibition. Arsenal Contemporary is located at 214 Bowery. And so you've heard all night about these goodie bags, the goodie bags. So we made artist takeaway bags. We're going to do a grand reveal now. So please make sure to grab one on your way out. Thank you.